Demis Hassabis did not leave Google. He got a bigger title, a chairman's seat, and a mandate to think about artificial general intelligence full-time. And Alphabet still shed roughly $246 billion of market value in the 2 trading sessions that followed. That gap is the story. Because what Google announced on August 5th was not a resignation. It was a deletion. The job of DeepMind chief executive, a post that existed only because DeepMind was supposed to be a company inside a company, was not handed to a successor. It was taken off the org chart. This is AI Daily. Today we take apart the mechanics of that decision. What got dismantled, who has already walked out, where they went, what the market actually priced, and what all of it says about the next 12 months of the model race. Start with what Alphabet actually published. On August 5th, Sundar Pichai posted a note titled "The Next Chapter of Our AI Momentum." In it, Demis Hassabis moves from chief executive of Google DeepMind to chair of Google DeepMind, and simultaneously picks up a new holding company title, chief scientist of Alphabet. He keeps running Isomorphic Labs, the drug discovery spinout. He continues working with Pichai on what the Post calls strategic and global AGI matters. Read literally, Hassabis gained scope. He moved from being an operator at the division level to being a scientist at the parent company level. Now read the other half. Koray Kavukcuoglu, previously Google DeepMind's chief technology officer, becomes senior vice president of Google DeepMind. He oversees Gemini model development, frontier AI research, and the Gemini app and developer teams. And he reports to Sundar Pichai. Notice the title. Not chief executive. Senior vice president. That is the structural event. In April of 2023, Alphabet merged the old DeepMind with Google Brain and gave the combined unit its own CEO, because the entire premise was that this lab needed to run like an independent company, with its own culture and its own clock. 3 years later, that premise is gone. Google DeepMind is now a division, and it reports up like every other division. So who is the person actually running it now? Kavukcuoglu is a 13-year DeepMind veteran. He joined in 2012, back when the lab was a London startup teaching software to play Atari games. He did his doctorate under Yann LeCun at New York University, founded DeepMind's deep learning team, and his name sits on 2 of the most consequential systems the lab ever produced. DeepQ networks, which welded reinforcement learning to deep neural networks, and WaveNet, the speech synthesis architecture that still shapes how machines talk. In June of 2025, Google named him its first chief AI architect. He is not an outside hire brought in to clean house. He is the shipping half of the original DeepMind. But the swap did not happen in a vacuum. To understand why the market flinched at an org chart update, you have to count the people who left in the 7 weeks before it. Start with June 18th. Noam Shazeer, Google Vice President of Engineering and co-lead of the Gemini model family, announced on X that he was joining OpenAI as lead for architecture research. Shazeer is a co-author of the Transformer paper. His work is the architecture underneath essentially every large model shipping today, including the ones at his new employer. Google had paid roughly $2.7 billion in the 2024 Character AI deal to bring him back in the first place. He lasted less than 2 years. 1 day later, on June 19th, Reuters reported that John Jumper was leaving Google DeepMind for Anthropic. Jumper shared the 2024 Nobel Prize in Chemistry for AlphaFold. Then, on July 29th, the Financial Times reported the part that turned individual departures into a pattern. DeepMind had dismantled the AlphaFold team itself. Google confirmed to the FT that staff had been reassigned to Gemini projects and to work in enzyme design, genomics, and nuclear fusion, with some moving to Isomorphic Labs. Nearly a quarter of the full-time authors of the original AlphaFold papers have now left the company. 2 of them, Jonas Adler and Alexander Pritzel, followed Jumper to Anthropic. The AlphaFold database itself, with more than 200 million structure predictions, stays online. Which brings us to August 5th, and the name that hurt the most. Jeff Dean is leaving Google after 27 years. He was roughly the company's 30th employee. He built or co-built MapReduce, Bigtable, Spanner, TensorFlow, and the TPU program, which is to say a meaningful fraction of the infrastructure that modern machine learning runs on at Google and everywhere else. And he did not go alone. Sanjay Ghemawat, Google's senior fellow and Dean's collaborator for a quarter of a century, went with him. So did Oriol Vinyals, a research vice president at DeepMind, and Quoc, a founding member of Google Brain. For names, one day, all four of them load-bearing. Now the context that makes the timing land. In May, at Google's developer conference, the company said its next flagship model, Gemini 3.5 Pro, was already being used internally and would roll out to everyone the following month. That meant June. June came and went. On July 16th, Bloomberg reported that the launch had slipped because the model was failing to meet Google's own internal performance goals, with coding singled out as the weak spot. Subsequent reporting described a full rebuild of the base model and more missed internal dates after that. Alphabet stock fell 4.4% on the day that delay was reported. On July 21st, Google did ship 3 models, in fact. Gemini 3.6 Flash, described as the workhorse tier and using up to 17% fewer tokens than its predecessor. Gemini 3.5 Flashlight, aimed at the cheapest end of the market, and Gemini 3.5 Flash Cyber, a security-tuned variant restricted to governments and trusted partners in a limited pilot. Now look at that list again. Flash, Flashlight, Flash Cyber. 3 efficiency tier releases, and no Pro. Product lead Logan Kilpatrick said at the time that the team was testing 3.5 Pro with partners and hoped to land it soon. So plot the coordinates. Google's Transformer co-author is now at OpenAI. Google's Nobel laureate and 2 of his AlphaFold co-authors are now at Anthropic. Google's chief scientist and 3 senior researchers are now at their own startup. And Google is the one American frontier lab whose flagship model, promised for June, still was not generally available while its leadership was being rearranged in August. None of those facts on its own proves a decline. Put together, they explain why an internal reporting change got read on the outside as a distress signal. Let us put real numbers on the reaction, pulled from market data rather than from headlines. Alphabet closed August 4th at $377.65. On August 5th, the day of the announcement, it closed at $362.43. Down 4.03%. The following session, August 6th, it fell another 1.36% to $357.50. 2 sessions, a cumulative decline of 5.3%. Against roughly 12.2 billion shares outstanding. That 2-day move erases about $246 billion of market value. For scale, that is more than the entire market capitalization of most companies in the S&P 500. And the setup makes it sharper. Alphabet had been running hot into the news, up 6.7% on July 31st and another 4.9% on August 3rd. The stock gave back both of those days, and then some. It now sits about 11% below its May 13th high of $402.62. With a market capitalization near $4.4 trillion. Year-to-date, though, the picture is less dramatic than the headline. Alphabet is up about 14% since the start of 2026, ahead of Microsoft at 2% and Meta at -10%, and just behind Amazon at 17%. So this is not a collapse. It is a repricing of one specific thing. How much of Alphabet's AI premium was resting on the individual people whose names appeared in that memo? As always on this channel, that is a description of what happened to the numbers. It is not advice about what to do with them. For the developer reaction, we use Hacker News as a thermometer. Pichai's post hit the front page and, within a day, sat at 797 points and 854 comments, an order of magnitude above a routine Google announcement. And the tone in that thread was not primarily about Hassabis. It clustered on 2 things: alarm at the sheer scale of the last few months of departures, and a recurring question about why the Gemini team's output has trailed rivals despite Google's enormous compute advantage. One comment summed the mood up in 6 words: an absolute earthquake at DeepMind lately. Now, the most interesting mechanism in this whole story, and the part most coverage skipped past. Dean's new company is called Discovery Loop, and the name is the thesis. Scientific discovery is a loop. Form a hypothesis, run an experiment, evaluate the result, form the next hypothesis. The founder's argument is that the entire loop can be computerized, so that a system runs thousands of experiments in parallel instead of a lab running a handful in sequence. The stated first target is automating machine learning research and engineering itself, before branching into hardware design, drug discovery, and clean energy. Here is the structure. Discovery Loop is a public benefit corporation, not an ordinary C Corp, which is the same legal wrapper OpenAI and Anthropic used to write a mission into the charter. Its initial round is co-led by Radical Ventures and Khosla Ventures, with Kleiner Perkins, Lightspeed, and Door Capital participating. The size has not been disclosed. And then the detail that makes this genuinely unusual. Alphabet is itself an investor. According to Pichai's own post, Google is a founding investor and a cloud partner. Sit with that for a second. Google lost its chief scientist, a senior fellow, a DeepMind research vice president, and a Brain founding member, and simultaneously bought a stake in the company that took them and signed up to sell at compute. That is not a talent loss in the ordinary sense. It is an outsourcing. Alphabet appears to have concluded that speculative, long-horizon science is better done outside the building, funded by its balance sheet, running on its cloud, with the upside captured through equity rather than through headcount. One Hacker News commenter called the disclosure a Kinsley gaffe, the kind of accidental admission that happens when someone says something true they had not meant to reveal. So what does it actually mean? First, read it as a specialization, not as a demotion. Every artifact from the last 2 months points in the same direction. The AlphaFold team gets folded into Gemini work. Deep science bets get spun out to Discovery Loop or moved into isomorphic labs. And the operator who now runs the lab, Kavukcuoglu, is a shipping engineer reporting straight to the chief executive of Google. Alphabet is converting a research institute into a model factory, and it is doing so at the exact moment its flagship model is late. Second, look at where Hassabis' own attention had already gone. On July 14th, he published an essay on his personal Substack titled A Framework for Frontier AI and the Dawning of a New Age. In it, he argues that AGI is probably only a few short years away, that there is a precious window to build oversight before it arrives, and that current evaluations of frontier models for cyber capability, biorisk, deception, and autonomy amount to warning shots. He has said publicly that AGI will land with something like 10 times the impact of the Industrial Revolution at 10 times the speed. 3 weeks later, he traded an operating job for a title that lets him work on exactly that, full-time. Third, the split verdict. The bear case, and the one the tape voted for, is straightforward. This is another reorganization at a company that has now reshuffled its AI leadership repeatedly while falling behind on shipped frontier models. The bull case, which several commentators made within hours, is that removing a semi-autonomous lab chief executive from the middle of the chain means fewer competing agendas, cleaner compute allocation, and a single unified AI strategy running straight into Pichai. Both readings fit exactly the same facts. Which one is correct is an empirical question, and it gets answered by a model, not by a memo. So here's what to actually watch. Number 1. Gemini 3.5 Pro. It was promised for June. Whether it lands, and how it benchmarks against the current frontier on coding specifically, is now the single cleanest test of whether this restructuring was the cause of the problem or the response to it. Number 2. Whether the departures stop. For senior people left on one day. The real question is whether the tier below them, the researchers who were reporting to Dean, Vinyals and Quoc, stays put now that there is a well-funded alternative with their old bosses inside it. Number 3. What Discovery Loop actually builds and how fast. If the pitch is automating machine learning research itself, then a company founded by the people who built TensorFlow, the TPU program, and AlphaStar is a genuinely credible attempt at it, and Alphabet owns a piece of it. Number 4. Whether other labs copy the structure. If externalizing long-horizon research into a separately funded public benefit corporation works for Google, it is a template that Microsoft, Amazon, and Meta can all run. And watch whether Hassabis' regulatory push goes anywhere. On July 14th, he called for a United States-led global AI watchdog before the end of the year, and he now has both the title and the calendar to chase it. To sum it up, Demis Hassabis did not leave Google, and that is precisely why this matters. What was removed was not a person, but a structure. The idea that DeepMind is a company inside a company, with its own chief executive and its own clock. What replaced it is a division, a senior vice president, and a direct line into Sundar Pichai. Meanwhile, the science mission has been distributed across 3 separate addresses: Isomorphic Labs, Discovery Loop, and, for a Nobel laureate and 2 of his co-authors, Anthropic. Alphabet has told you plainly what it now wants from its AI lab. It wants Gemini on time. Everything in this episode is checked against primary sources. Market data comes from a finance through the August 6th close, and nothing here is investment advice. If this breakdown was useful, subscribe. We do one of these every day, and we will be watching all 4 of those signals. Thanks for watching.